r/Nosleep. Posted by u/JTB685. Check out author's subreddit r/JTB685. Beneath the streets of Paris, I played the ravenous rat game. That's what I love about these old tunnels, the equality. Antoine drew an enthusiastic breath. It doesn't matter whether you're a prince or a pauper, down here, everyone's shit gets mixed together. He and I followed 2 steps behind Dupont, our foreman, as we made our way along a concrete walkway hugging a river of sewage. Whichever way I turned my head, rat shapes splashed through puddles of water, hiding from the light in my helmet. As one scurried right over my work boot, I jumped to the side. My left leg plunged straight into the stream. When I pulled it back out, my blue jumpsuit was a shade darker up to the ankle. Any deeper in the current would have swept me away. Antoine nudged me in the ribs. "Can't wait for your baptism, huh, Rican?" The baptism was a prank the maintenance guys played on rookies. They said on your first excursion into the lower sewers you had to dunk yourself in the waste. Called it an initiation ritual. I was confident the whole thing was a dumb joke, although there was a slight tinge of anxiety in my gut. The Rican thing was because I was the only American on the crew. "Quiet," Dupont said, coming to a stop. Dupont was a beefy man with a crew cut. He was a couple decades older than Antoine and me. I found out the hard way he had zero sense of humor. Since joining the team, I'd been nothing but a punching bag for their insults. I tried joining in the fun by firing one Dupont's way. "You served in the French military, monsieur?" I said, grinning. "Did they teach you how to wave a little white flag?" That faux pas landed me a week of equipment cleanup. Dupont swept his beam of light around, inspecting the connecting pipes and tunnels. "This way." As we climbed down steel ladders welded to the walls, the tunnels grew older and narrower until we were forced to march single file, me at the rear. Here the wastage trickled through a shallow, concrete drain to our left-hand side. The stink got worse the further we went. It was so thick it felt like getting blasted in the face with hot air, a delicate mix of Paris' most delectable entrees. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't keep myself from periodically retching. "Something taste bad, Rican?" Antoine asked. "Don't worry, after the baptism you'll hardly notice it." I said nothing. At the end of a long tunnel, we climbed down into thick, deep darkness. Every so often I heard splashing sounds and spun around, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. It sounded too loud to be rats. Not even the giant ones that seemed to be stalking us made that kind of noise. It sounded more like footsteps. I kept trying to find whatever was making the noise with my light, but only caught glimpses of moving shadows. At one point I heard a whisper and spun around. For a fraction of a second, I saw a silhouette of a figure. My grip tightened around the hammer attached to my tool belt. "There's something back there." "Maybe it's the lastration we brought down here," Antoine said, then laughed heartily. "Bugs," Dupont shouted, shining his torch in my face. "Keep your eyes peeled for signs of structural damage and blockages, got it?" I nodded. Antoine kept chuckling until Dupont turned to him. "And you, eyes open, mouth shut." As we continued along the splashes got louder and closer. I told myself it was just my imagination. At one point it felt as if something was hovering over my shoulder, following just a few steps behind. I fought the urge to look back. Instead, I examined the brick walls. Eventually, Dupont came to a halt. "There's the problem." Part of a wall had collapsed, exposing a hole big enough to walk through. The pile of rubble was clogging up the drain. Dupont said, "Remove the blockage and get the waste flowing again. We'll line up the debris along the edge of the walkway." Antoine and I worked while Dupont checked his maps. With each passing minute, the rats got closer. More daring. One stopped 5 foot away from us and sat up on its hind legs, glaring with its huge, unblinking eyes. Every so often I heard more whispers and reminded myself it was only my imagination. By the time we got the runoff back to a steady flow, sweat was lashing down my brow. "Is that it?" I asked. "Can we get back already?" Dupont was inspecting the inside of the hole. Antoine leaned forward and stuck his head inside. "Hey, what the hell is that?" "Skulls," Dupont replied flatly. "This passage intersects with the catacombs. The Paris catacombs are famous. Picture walls and columns made from bone, surrounding underground ossuaries holding the remains of over 6 million people. Some sections are open to tourists. Unfortunately, we were far below that point." I peeked inside the hole. Skulls lined a narrow passageway from floor to ceiling. "This section isn't on any of my maps," Dupont said. I'm going to check it out. Wait here. Antoine smirked at me, then followed DuPont. Not liking the idea of being alone with the rats, I followed them. Anxiously, I edged through the narrow passage. At one point, I lost my balance and reached out to space in front of me. My finger slipped inside a set of empty eye sockets. With a quiet yelp, I forced my hands to my sides. A sound came from the space to my right, footfalls stalking us, but when I whipped my head around, I saw nothing. Just your imagination, I thought. Keep it together. The passage opened onto a maze of corridors, the walls of which were made from alternating rows of bones and brick. I recognized parts of rib cages and femurs, all coated in an odd fungus. Here the stench was more of rot and dead things. Antoine whistled. Impressive. Think the city knows about this place? We should really get back, I said, towing the line between convincing the others to leave and not revealing just how scared I really was. DuPont ignored my remark and answered Antoine's question. Unlikely. It's not on the maps. He disappeared around a corner. When Antoine and I made the turn, DuPont was standing frozen on the spot. Everything okay, boss? Antoine asked. DuPont pointed towards the wall in front of us. Pressed up against it was a bronze statue. Against the dim light of our helmets, I could only make out a vague bird shape. Antoine flicked on his torch, illuminating an eagle. His light traveled downward, revealing a swastika. I gulped. What is it? Antoine asked. A Nazi statue, DuPont replied, tonelessly. Yeah, I mean what's the fuck's it doing down here? DuPont stepped forward. During the war, when the Allies bombed Paris, a lot of Germans took refuge underground. I heard a quiet voice and spun around. Half a dozen rats pushed past, screeching. Maybe they sealed this section up, DuPont continued. We could be the first ones to set foot in here since the 40s. A silhouetted figure tore across a passage intersected with the one we were in. I whipped my head over just in time to see a barefoot disappear around a corner. There's something in here, I whispered in as low a voice as possible. I think we should go. Now. There came no reply. When I finally ripped my eyes away from the spot where I'd seen the figure, Antoine and DuPont were gone. I began panting. I raced through the passages calling their names, no longer concerned with masking my fear. Without warning, something squealed under my boot. I staggered back, tripped, and fell to the floor. My helmet landed a few feet away, its light pointed towards me, as a plump rat scurried out of sight. When I tried to stand, pain flared in my right ankle. DuPont? Antoine? I called, my voice echoing back towards me. I slowly crawled towards my helmet. As I reached out to grab it, a pale hand burst from the darkness and snatched it away. I stopped breathing. The ray of light revealed a club foot pointed sideways. Fear swelled in my stomach. The figure holding my helmet tilted it upward, exposing a frail body covered in stitched cloth. I pressed my hands against my mouth, stifling a scream. The light arrived at a head. There were crooked eyes, the right several inches lower than the left, swollen lips, and ears 3 times too big for the skull to which they were attached. It was a child. A hideous, deformed child. More footsteps crept up behind me. I spun onto my back, my heart pounding against my chest. Take a little tumble, Recon? It was Antoine. There's something there. I flipped over onto my front. The child had vanished, leaving my helmet behind. There was a child, I said, my voice weak and unsure. Antoine chuckled. Okay, let's get you up, then you can tell me all about the scary ghost child. A towering figure emerged from the gloom, stopping right behind Antoine. Antoine, I stammered. He didn't react. Antoine, I said, a little louder this time, pointing past his shoulder with a trembling finger. All I saw were outlines. Suggestions of events. 2 grotesque, ogre-like hands completely enveloped Antoine's head. He shrieked. I tried to stand but couldn't. The hands squeezed Antoine's temples together and hoisted him into the air. Antoine's shrieks climbed higher and higher, until the figure bashed his head against the nearest wall. Antoine fell to the ground with a dull thud. Before I could react, the figure was upon me. Something solid collided with my head, an open palm. Pain ignited in my temple as the world shifted out of focus. The figure placed something over my head, obscuring my vision, then a single hand wrapped around both my ankles and dragged me across the cold floor. The next thing I remember is hearing a hoarse, female voice speaking German. I sat against a bumpy wall in an L shape, my hands cuffed above my head. I couldn't understand what the voice was saying, but I heard the name Wolfgang several times. Replies came in the form of deep grunts and sounds. And there was another sound, too. Squeaking. Close by. Heavy footsteps faded into the distance, then I felt a foul breath against my face. A moment later, a bag got snatched off my head. I was in a small cellar, illuminated by a flickering fire in the center of the room. Antoine was handcuffed alongside me. His head drooped against his chest, and the side of his face was caked with blood. To my right were rat cages stacked on top of one another, jammed full of rats clinging to the wires and ceiling. Standing before me was a decrepit old hag and the freak child from earlier. The hag's hair was all tangled in knots. Her bones were rickety and bent out of shape, and her skin pale and covered with sores. My arms were bound to a post by an old-fashioned pair of handcuffs. My helmet and a ring of keys sat atop a wooden table in the middle of the cellar. "Where am I?" I groaned. "What's going on?" The child turned to the lady and spoke German. I took a deep breath. "Who are you people?" Antoine groaned, delirious with pain. The lady smirked, exposing a set of teeth with many gaps. "Please, let us go," I said in English. "We won't tell anyone about this. I swear." The boy tugged the lady's arm and spoke German again. So far as I could tell, he referred to her as Oma Brummer. I fought against my cuffs, my throat closing over. "Please, let us go," I cried, in English first, then French. The lady's arthritic claw clamped over my lips. "Ah, you speak French," she said, with a thick German accent. Yes, I speak French. What the hell's going on?" Her head tilted downward. "And you are, American?" "Yes, I'm American." Her eyes lit up. "What the fuck is this place?" I asked. "Who are you people?" "This is my family. This is our home. And you are trespassing." No, we're not trespassing. We came down here to fix." "Quiet," she struck me across the face. The child pulled her arm anxiously. She patted his head, nodded, then said something back. The kid cheered. My blood pressure skyrocketed. I didn't know what they were talking about and I sure as shit didn't want to find out. "Please let us go, I'll do anything," I begged. "All I want," she said, pressing her lips against my ear, "is to make you scream so loud das Führer hears it." The senile bitch had lost her fucking mind. The child disappeared into the darkness and returned with what resembled a fencing mask with a trapdoor in the top. "Look," I said, forcing the words out between desperate breaths. "I don't know how long you've been down here, but the Allies won." She hit me across the face again. Hard. "I know what happened. I know what you people did, hunting down proud Nazi soldiers like dogs. You're the reason my husband and I sought refuge down here in the first place." "Husband?" "Ja. When your kind began hunting us down, we hid underground." The child slipped the fencing mask over my head, then I heard the trapdoor flip open. I whipped my head back and forth but couldn't shake the mask off. "We've been down here ever since," Brummer continued, "nurturing a beautiful Aryan family free from persecution." Antoine spat blood and muttered something incomprehensible. "And if we were to let you go, American, that would cause problems." She signaled the boy, who snatched a rat out of one of the cages by the tail. "You'd go running back to the surface and return with intentions of putting us on trial for our so-called crimes." The rat squealed and thrashed around, agitated. "No, I wouldn't tell a soul, I swear," I lied, desperate to avoid whatever was about to happen. "I can't allow that. My family have already endured too much pain." "Pain?" I asked without meaning to. "We endured hardships you can't even imagine, surviving down here all alone. A dreadful sickness took my beloved from me much too soon, not to mention my own sons and daughters. All I have left are my dear, sweet grandchildren." At first, I thought I'd mistranslated what she said. But then I took another look at the child's distorted features and gulped. The child dangled the rat above the mask fastened to my head. I thrashed around, screaming no, over and over again. "The rats are very, very hungry today, American," the crazy Nazi bitch said. "We haven't fed them for weeks, and it's been a long time since we had someone to play the ravenous rat game with. I was going to wait until Wolfgang tracked down your last friend so he could enjoy watching the rats tear you apart, but this little one," she stroked the boy's hair, "just can't wait any longer." Wolfgang must have been her other grandchild, the big fucker who took Antoine down. Oma Brummer waved her finger, then gestured downward. "Tonight, we make das Führer proud." With a broad grin, the child lowered the rat into the mask attached to my head. It sniffed around, Then its red eyes focused on mine with murderous intent. I'd read somewhere that animals ate the squishy parts of humans first. Was that true? I prayed it wasn't true. The rat's front legs scrabbed forward, the little bastard couldn't wait to get started. Sweat poured down my face as I pressed my eyelids closed, too afraid to look. There came a sound from the darkness. Brummer gestured, and then the child lifted the rat back out of the mask. It tore a chunk of flesh from my nose as it went. Brummer slipped the device off my head, then stuffed a gag into my mouth. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a steel knife, then blew out the fire, leaving us in blackness. A moment later, the light from DuPont's helmet was blinding me. I'd never been so happy to see anyone in my entire life. He pulled the gag out of my mouth. "Boggs, are you?" "Look out," I screamed. Brummer burst towards us, clutching her knife overhead. DuPont spun around at the last second, catching her wrist. He put his free hand in her face and pushed her back. She bit down on DuPont's fingers as they thrashed around. DuPont yelled, then gave her a big shove. She staggered backward, getting swallowed by the gloom. I heard the rat cages fall to the ground and break apart. There came a scattering of tiny feet, followed by a shrill shriek from Oma Brummer. DuPont rushed to my side. "Boggs, you okay?" Yeah. Antoine and I are chained up. I think the keys are over there." DuPont shook Antoine awake. "You still with us, bud?" He gave a weak nod, taking labored inhales. "We've got to get out of here, fast," I said. "Before the big one gets back." DuPont grabbed the keys. "Big one?" Brummer's squeals climbed higher. "Her grandson," I said. "The fucker was gigantic." Antoine groaned, then gave a wet cough. He needed a doctor. Badly. DuPont freed me, then we both helped Antoine to his feet. As we did, I explained everything. Since Antoine was so unsteady, DuPont and I took most of his weight. After a few steps, I kicked something metal. Brummer's knife. "Hold on a second." I slipped it into my belt. Might come in useful. As we crossed the cellar, DuPont's helmet illuminated the spot where the cages had been for a fraction of a second. Just long enough to catch a glimpse of Oma Brummer playing for the Ravenous Rat Game all-time scoring record. A small figure tore past us and out of the cellar. The child, on the way to warn Wolfgang, no doubt. There was no time to waste. We were out of the cellar and back into the skull passageway within minutes. Back in the tunnels, the stink of sewage assaulted my senses once again. My ankle was still on fire, and Antoine had seen better days, but we traveled as fast as we could. Soon Antoine regained enough of his senses to feebly climb a few ladders by himself. Just when we thought we were going to make it out, a startling growl filled the tunnel. My blood ran cold. From the sound of things, Wolfgang had discovered what we'd done to his sweet Oma and was hot on our tails. We quickened our pace, returning to the sewage river at last. I never thought I'd be happy to see human excrement. One final ladder stood atop a raised platform. After that, we'd be back on the surface. Antoine went first, disappearing from vision after a couple of steps. "You next," DuPont said authoritatively. I was in no mood to argue. DuPont followed right after me. I was almost at the top when I heard him grunt and looked down. A massive hand reached out and seized his ankle. His knuckles had turned white from trying to hold on. "Go," he shouted, then got swallowed up by the gloom. A voice in the back of my head said, "Keep climbing, get Antoine back above the surface, then go find help." But when DuPont's scream filled the tunnel, I knew what I had to do. Took a deep breath, I let go of the ladder. I landed on the back of what had to be Wolfgang, who took the weight effortlessly. Both his hands were on DuPont's head. I tried to throw my arm around his neck, but it was too thick. Wolfgang let go of DuPont's head, grabbed mine, then rolled me over his shoulder with ease. I landed on my back at the edge of the platform and groaned. It happened so fast the wind got knocked out of me. I looked up, got my first proper look at the final member of the Brummer clan. A crop of blonde hair rested snugly on top of a bulging brow and mismatched eyes. His mouth was filled with pointed teeth. He had to be 7 feet tall, at least, and close to 300 pounds. Wolfgang's back was to the sewage river. He had a foot raised and ready to stomp in my skull when DuPont launched himself forwards. His hammer sailed straight into Wolfgang's forehead. Besides a short grunt, Wolfgang didn't react to the blow. He just reached out, grabbed DuPont by the throat. DuPont rasped as Wolfgang hoisted him into the air. By now I'd caught my wind, and I still had Brummer's knife in my belt. In one smooth motion, I slipped it out and stabbed it into Wolfgang's neck. Wolfgang barely winced. His eyes focused on me, then he windmilled his arms dramatically. I dived under them at the very last second, picked up DuPont's hammer, and hit Wolfgang's chin with the claw side. That got a reaction. Wolfgang made a noise that sounded like German mixed with animal howls and finally let go of DuPont. But the fucker still wouldn't go down. He swung his arms around, again and again, forcing me backward, screaming, "You goff, ugo-o." I bashed Wolfgang's kneecap with the hammer. He made a moan of pain. DuPont reached up and ripped the knife out of Wolfgang's neck. Blood pumped out of the hole. Wolfgang staggered back, teetering on the edge of the platform. He grabbed his throat and slipped to his knees. I took the opportunity to strike the crown of his skull again and again. Shockwaves ran up to my elbow, it felt like banging on a brick wall. I struck his nose, making a sound like a branch breaking, then DuPont stabbed the knife into Wolfgang's eye. Wolfgang fell onto his back, the top half of his body dangling over the edge of the platform. In unison, DuPont and I each grabbed a leg and heaved. Wolfgang plunged into the sewage head first, the knife still embedded in his eye. He completely disappeared for a moment, then bobbed above the surface face up, his blonde hair clogged with brown lumps. As the current carried him off, I couldn't help but wonder whether the baptism was as much fun as Antoine had made it sound. From the other side of the river, the freak child was watching us, a look of terror frozen on his face. DuPont touched my shoulder. "Boggs, you okay?" The child shrank back into the darkness. I nodded. Bruised, battered, and stinking of shit, DuPont and I climbed the ladder, discovering Antoine passed out beside the sewer entrance. What followed next was a series of meetings, interviews, and interrogations. City officials had DuPont, Antoine and I tell our story separately, then together. I could tell by the look on the investigators' faces they didn't believe us. It didn't matter, though, because in the end a senior city official handed me a check for hazard pay. DuPont said it was actually shut the fuck up about what happened money. Either way, I was happy. Once I'd recovered from my injuries, and after saying goodbye to my former colleagues, I used the cash to book myself a first-class flight out of France. The minute I got home I signed up with a recruitment agency and sat down with a cheerful lady who asked what sort of work I was looking for. "Anything that doesn't involve working with rats or sewage," I said. I would have added, "or underground incest Nazis," but I felt that went without saying.